The Vulnari hegemony liked things neat, quiet, and under control. Their ships were clean, their uniforms sharp, and their conquests always went exactly as planned. No mess, no surprises. That was how they liked it. Kes9 was supposed to be just another boring victory dot. It was a small, dusty planet on the outer edge of known space. Rich in rare metals, poor in life. The few native creatures were slow, harmless, and easily herded. The Vulnari had scanned it from orbit for weeks. No signs of advanced tech. No cities. No weapons. Perfect dot, so when their fleet arrived, they didn't even bother with a formal warning. They simply dropped a data buoy into the atmosphere that broadcasted in every known language. This world is now under the protection of the Vulnari hegemony. Resistance is illogical. Compliance is rewarded. Then they began landing their smooth silver drop pods in neat rows near the largest mineral deposits. Their soldiers marched out in perfect formation, setting up tents, force fields, and mining rigs with calm efficiency. Everything was going according to schedule. What they didn't know was that 3 humans had been living in the canyon lands of Kes9 for the past 5 months. Their ship, the Rusty Nail, wasn't much to look at. Just a beat-up scout hauler with a patched hull and a reactor that groaned like an old dog. But it had gotten them this far, until the main jump coil blew during a sandstorm. They'd crash-landed hard, losing 2 crewmates in the impact. Only 3 made it out: Captain Elias Vance, Engineer Mira Cho, and Medic Jax Wren. They'd survived by staying hidden. Kes9 wasn't kind. Days reached 60 degrees Celsius. Nights dropped below freezing. The air was thin, laced with sulfur and iron dust. Twice weekly electrical storms turned the sky purple and fried anything with unshielded circuits. But Earth had taught them how to handle harsh places. They filtered water from rock cracks. They ate lichen and roasted skitter lizards. They slept in shifts, watching for dust wolves with 6 eyes and teeth like glass shards. They'd heard rumors of the Vulnari. Everyone in the Outer Rim had, cold, efficient, ruthless in their own quiet way. So when the sky filled with silver ships, the humans didn't signal, didn't call for help. On Earth, you didn't shout when predators were near. You stayed silent. You waited. The waiting got harder when the bombing started. It began 2 days after the Vulnari landed. Their drones scanned the northern ridges, detected heat signatures, probably just rock vents or cave-dwelling animals, and marked them as possible resistance cells. The Vulnari didn't take chances. They launched orbital strikes. Plasma bolts screamed from the sky. The ground shook. One blast hit less than 2 clicks from the humans' hideout, a shallow cave behind a waterfall of black sand. The shockwave collapsed half their shelter. Dust filled the air. Mira coughed blood. She'd inhaled something sharp. Jax's leg was pinned under fallen rock. And the Rusty Nail, already broken, now had its emergency beacon antenna sheared off. Elias checked the comms. Dead. Power at 12%. Oxygen recycler failing. They had maybe 36 hours before they suffocated or bled out. He looked at his crew. Myra's eyes were glassy but alert. Jax gave a weak thumbs up, jaw clenched against the pain. They all knew the rules. Rule 1 of deep space survival: never send a distress call unless you're already dead. Signals attract pirates, scavengers, or worse empires. But Rule 2 was older, deeper. If you've got 1 shot left, take it. Elias crawled to the ship's core console. With trembling fingers, he bypassed the fried relays and rerouted power from the dying battery into the long-range transmitter. It sparked and smoked, but it worked. Now came the hard part. What to say? Most ships would send a simple SOS location, status, request for aid. But Elias knew that wouldn't be enough. Not out here. No one would come for 3 anonymous humans stranded on a worthless rock. Unless He opened the emergency protocol file. Buried deep in Earth's Alliance archives was a code used only once before, during the Ganymede incident. It wasn't just a distress call. It was a declaration. He typed slowly, each keystroke heavy with meaning. Alert Omega-9 planet under Sega Deathworlders in peril, all human fleets respond. Immediately coordinates. KESS-9. Sector GAM-MA7. Then he hit send. The signal shot into space. A tight beam burst, encrypted, impossible to fake. It carried a digital signature that only human commanders would recognize. And it used the one word that made even hardened admirals sit up straight. Deathworlders. The Vulnary picked up the transmission almost at once. Their listening posts flagged it as low-priority alien chatter. A junior analyst reviewed it and chuckled. Deathworlders? That's a nursery myth, he told his supervisor. Old spacer tale. Supposedly, there's a species from a planet so deadly, they evolved to fight bears with rocks. Obviously nonsense. The supervisor nodded. Mark it as feral distress. Log it. No action required. They never imagined that across the galaxy, in shipyards hidden behind asteroid belts and on battle stations orbiting dead stars, humans were hearing that signal, and they were already moving. Back in the cave, Elias slumped against the console. The transmitter died with a final wheeze. He looked at Mira and Jax. We did what we could, he said. Mira smiled faintly. Hope they bring coffee. I'd kill for real coffee. Jax groaned. If they come, I just want a bed. A soft one, with clean sheets. Outside, the wind howled. Another plasma bolt lit the horizon. The Velmeri were still bombing empty hills, but far above, in the silent dark between stars, something was changing. Engines were firing. Shields were powering up. Guns were loading. And humanity scattered. Stubborn and forged in the fires of a planet that never stopped trying to kill. Them was on its way. The Volnari still thought this was just another clean conquest. They had no idea what was coming. Not yet, but they would. Soon enough. And when they did, they would understand their error in that single, terrible moment. The instant they realized the myth was real, and it was very, very angry. The signal reached human space faster than anyone could have guessed. It bounced off relay stations built into dead comets. It slipped through the static of neutron stars. It raced past old war drones, still drifting from conflicts no one remembered. And within minutes, it was heard. On the mining world of Series 7, a grizzled station chief named Hoffel was drinking synth tea in his control room when the alarm blared. Red lights flashed. The words OMEGA-9, Deathworlders in Peril, scrolled across every screen. He dropped his cup. It shattered on the floor, but he didn't care. He hit a single button black, labeled only with a skull symbol, across the asteroid belt, hidden behind layers of rock and ice. Massive hangar doors groaned open. Dust and frozen gas spilled into space as the UNSC Iron Mule powered up its engines. Its crew had been sleeping in shifts, waiting for this exact call. At the same time, on the edge of the Helios Drift, Admiral Valeria Rook stood on the bridge of the UNSC Bellerophon, watching stars streak past during a routine patrol. She was tall, with scars on her arms from old plasma burns and eyes that had seen too many lost ships. When the Omega alert flashed on her private screen, she didn't flinch. She just turned to her comms officer and said, "Sound the horn." The ship's deep bass klaxon echoed through every deck. Marines bolted upright from bunks. Engineers ran to engine cores. Pilots sprinted to their fighters. No questions. No delays. Everyone knew what Deathworlders in Peril meant. It meant someone had hurt one of their own. And that was the last mistake their enemy would ever make. Dozens of ships responded, not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to. Human fleets weren't like the Valnari. They weren't one strict army. They were miners, traders, explorers, and soldiers scattered across the stars, but bound by one unbreakable rule. If Earth's children were in danger, you came. No matter how far. No matter the cost. Some ships were old, patched together with scrap metal and hope. Others were sleek war machines bristling with railguns and missile pods. One even launched from a hidden base inside a hollowed-out moon. They all jumped to the same coordinates. Kes-9. 17 minutes after the SOS was sent. The first human ship tore through the fabric of space near Kes-9's orbit. It was the UNSC Raging Bull, a heavy destroyer with hull plates dented from 100 battles. It didn't slow down. It came in hot, engines glowing red, weapons already online. Behind it, 6 more ships unfolded from warp space like ghosts stepping out of fog. On the Valnari command ship, alarms began screaming. "What is this?" High Stratego Zernvex demanded, his voice sharp with confusion. "Who are these vessels? Identify them." His center officer stared at the readings, face pale. Unknown design. Heavy armor. Weapons hot. No hails. No transponder codes. They're not in the Galactic Registry. Impossible, Vex snapped. All spacefaring species are registered. Then another ship arrived. Then another. Within 5 minutes, over 30 human vessels filled the sky around Kes-9. Some were so big they blocked out the sun. Others moved like shadows, silent and fast. None followed standard approach paths. None asked for permission. They just appeared and started fighting. The Iron Mule launched a barrage of kinetic rods from high orbit. Each one was a long chunk of tungsten, dropped straight down with no explosives, just raw speed and gravity. They hit the Valnari mining camps with the force of small asteroids. One rod punched through a command dome, vaporizing the officers inside before they could blink. On the ground, Valnari soldiers scrambled for cover. Their neat rows of tents were shredded by shrapnel. Their drones short-circuited as electromagnetic pulses washed over the planet. High above, Admiral Rook watched the chaos unfold on her screen. Her face was calm, but her fingers tapped a quiet rhythm. On the arm of her Chera habit she'd picked up during the siege of Titan. "Send the drop teams," she ordered. Hundreds of drop pods fired from the bellies of human ships. They streaked through the atmosphere like meteors, trailing fire. Each pod carried 6 Marines in powered armor black, scarred, and covered in stickers from old battles. The armor wasn't pretty. It was functional, repaired with duct tape, spare parts, and weld marks. But it worked. The pod slammed into the surface near the human survivors' cave. Doors blew open. Marines rolled out, rifles up, scanning for threats. Clear left. Right's hot watched the ridge. "Medic, we've got wounded." They moved fast, speaking in short, sharp words. No wasted motion. No fear. To them, Kes-9 wasn't a death trap. It was just another Tuesday. Back in orbit, the Valnari tried to regroup. Their fleet commander ordered all ships to form a defensive ring. Fighters launched. Shields powered up. But human ships didn't fight fair. The Raging Bull fired a plasma lance that melted a Valnari cruiser's engine core before it could turn. A small scout ship, no bigger than a shuttle, flew straight into a Valnari fighter wing, then detonated a hidden nuke. The explosion took out 3 enemy ships. Worst of all, the humans didn't seem to care about their own losses. One human frigate took 3 direct hits, but kept firing until its last gun exploded. The crew had already bailed out in escape pods. Laughing overcomes as they drifted. "They fight like they've got nothing to lose," whispered a Valnari officer. "They don't," said another, voice shaking. "They're from a death world. They expect to die. Every single day. On the surface, the rescue team reached the cave. Elias Vance almost shot them before he saw the Earth insignia on their shoulders, a blue circle with green continents. He lowered his pistol, hands trembling. About damn time. Myra croaked from inside. A Marine medic knelt beside Jax, pulling out a nano-injector. "You'll live, kid. But you owe me a beer." Elias looked past them, at the sky filled with human ships, at the burning wreckage of Velnari camps, at the Marines moving like they owned the planet. Did you really all come just for us?" He asked out the squad leader, a woman with a cybernetic eye and a tattoo that read, "Born Lucky," grinned. "Nah, we came 'cause someone messed with Deathworlders. That's not just bad manners. That's suicide." Back on the Bellerophon, Admiral Rook received a secure message. All human ships confirmed. The survivors were safe. Ground teams were securing the area. Velnari forces were in full retreat. She nodded. Good. Then she opened a new Channel 1 that broadcast on every Velnari frequency. "This is Admiral Valeria Rook of the United Human Fleets," she said, voice calm but cold as space. "You attacked unarmed humans on a neutral planet. You bombed without warning. You broke every rule of civilized war." She paused. "Let the words sink in. Consider this your only warning. Harm one more human, and we won't just come for your ships. We'll come for your homeworld. And unlike you, we don't believe in clean conquests." She cut the channel. On Velnari command ships, silence fell. Officers looked at each other, eyes wide. This wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't even a threat. It was a promise. And they knew, deep in their bones, that humans always kept their promises. In orbit, the human fleet didn't leave. They stayed, guarding, watching, because out here, in the dark between stars, everyone now knew two things. First, the Deathworlders were real. Second, you never, ever touched them, not unless you wanted the whole human race to show up at your door with guns loaded and no patience left. The Velnari believed war was a clean science. You measured strength, calculated risk, and applied force only where needed. You did not waste energy. You did not act out of rage. You followed logic, but the humans did not follow logic. They followed something older, something raw and sharp and buried deep in their bones. When the human drop teams hit the surface of Kes9, they did not form neat lines. They did not wait for orders. They spread out like wildfire, using the planet itself as a weapon. One squad used the sulfur vents to blind Velnari sensors with toxic smoke. Another set traps in dry riverbeds, wires tied to rocks, rigged to collapse on enemy patrols. A third team rode the backs of giant dust scorpions they'd tamed with meat and steady hands, using them as living tanks to crush Velnari outposts. The Velnari soldiers, trained in open-field tactics and perfect formation, were lost. They fired at shadows. They stepped on hidden spikes. Their drones shorted out in the planet's constant static storms. Worst of all, the humans laughed, not cruelly, not madly, but with the easy humor of people who had faced worse and lived to tell the story. "Man, this place is nice," one Marine said, crouched behind a boulder as plasma bolts whizzed overhead. "Reminds me of Arizona, only with more lightning and fewer rattlesnakes." "Yeah," his partner replied, loading a shotgun with slugs made from melted ship plating. "Back home, we had to dig our own water. Here, it just falls from the sky, well, the dusty sky." They moved like they owned the dirt beneath their boots. Because in a way, they did. Earth had taught them how to survive deserts that cooked flesh, jungles that ate metal, oceans that drowned cities, and winters that froze breath solid. Kes9? It was just another Tuesday. High Stratego Zernvex watched the battle unfold from orbit, his mind reeling. His troops were being pushed back not by superior numbers, but by sheer ingenuity. The humans used the wind, the storms, even the local wildlife as tools. They turned weakness into strength. He saw footage of a human medic dragging a wounded comrade through a magnetic storm, wearing nothing but a breath mask and a torn jacket, while Valnari soldiers huddled inside shielded tents, waiting for the weather event to pass. Why don't they wait? Vex demanded. Because, his science officer whispered, on their homeworld. Waiting gets you killed. Flashbacks flickered in Valnari data logs old. Buried files marked classified, do not distribute. They showed Earth, a blue-green world teeming with life so aggressive it seemed designed to destroy its own inhabitants. Oceans full of predators, skies full of storms, land crawling with creatures that bit, stung, poisoned, or crushed. And in the middle of it all, humans. Barefoot, then in skins, then in steel, always fighting, always surviving. They didn't just adapt. They thrived in chaos out back on Cas9. The human fleet wasn't just defending, they were teaching. A Valnari command post had taken shelter in a reinforced bunker near the equator. It was shielded, stocked with food, and guarded by elite shock troops. Safe, they thought. Then the ground shook. Not from a bomb. From beneath, the humans had found an underground lava tube, natural tunnel formed by ancient volcanic flows. They drilled into it, poured in a mix of fuel gel and oxidizer, and lit it with a remote spark. The resulting explosion didn't just breach the bunker. It turned the whole hillside into a firestorm. Valnari soldiers ran out screaming, their armor melting. Humans waited in the smoke, pulling survivors aside, checking IDs, and sparing those who hadn't fired on civilians. Only shoot the ones who shot first, a sergeant told his squad. The rest? They're just kids in shiny suits. Up above, Admiral Rook watched it all from her command deck. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just nodded. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. And justice, on Earth, had always been messy. The Valnari tried one last desperate move. They launched a full orbital strike on the human rescue site, the cave where the survivors had been found. If we cannot hold the planet, Vex ordered, then no one will. But the humans had expected it. Hours earlier, they'd moved the survivors to a hidden vault inside a derelict mining drone. Now, as plasma bolts rained down on the empty canyon, human fighters swarmed the Valnari bombers like angry hornets. One pilot, a young woman named Rios, looped her fighter through a dust storm, used the static to mask her heat signature, and fired a single railgun slug into the engine of the lead bomber. It spun out of control, crashing into two others. All three exploded in a silent bloom of fire against the black sky. On the ground, Elias Vance watched the sky light up. He sat beside Myra and Jox, wrapped in thermal blankets, sipping real coffee from a human canteen. Used to think space was the final frontier, Jox said, wincing as the medic changed his bandage. Turns out, Earth was the real nightmare. Myra snorted. Tell that to the guy who thought Cas9 was easy terrain. Elias said nothing. He just looked up as a human dropship landed nearby, its engines kicking up red dust. The ramp lowered. A tall man in a patched uniform walked out. Admiral Rook herself. She didn't salute. She just nodded at them. You called, she said simply. We did, Elias replied. You hungry? Starving. She tossed him a protein bar stamped with a cartoon Earth and the words, made on Deathworld, handle with respect. He laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. Around them, the battle raged. But in that small circle of light and warmth, it felt like home. The Valnari, watching from their failing ships, finally understood. This wasn't a war of weapons or numbers. It was a war of spirit. And spirit was something their clean, logical empire had long forgotten. The humans didn't win because they were stronger. They won because they'd never learned how to lose. And that was the most terrifying thing in the galaxy. High Stratego Zern Vex sat alone in his command chair. The bridge around him was dark, lit only by the red emergency glow of failing systems. Outside the viewport, human ships moved like wolves circling wounded prey. His fleet, once proud, polished, perfect, was broken. Half his vessels were wreckage drifting in orbit. The rest were powered down, shields dead, weapons cold. He had done everything by the book. Scanned the planet. Secured the zone. Eliminated threats. Yet somehow he had lost. Not to a greater fleet, not to a clever trap, but to a handful of survivors and the Fury. They called down from the stars. His hands shook as he pulled up the old files. The ones locked behind firewalls so deep, most Vulnari didn't even know they existed. The Xenological Archives. Section. Sol-3. The screen flickered to life. Grainy images appeared. Green jungles choking with vines, oceans boiling with storms, mountains spitting fire. And in the middle of it all, humans. Not in ships or cities, but in caves, in forests, in frozen wastes. Fighting bears with spears. Diving into shark-filled seas for food. Building towers in deserts where the wind could strip flesh from bone. The report was short, blunt, and stamped with a black seal. Species: Homo sapiens homeworld. Sol 3 designation: Deathworld. Threat level: EX Turiam Enotes. Evolved under constant environmental stress. Hyperpredation, disease, and self-inflicted warfare. Survivors exhibit extreme pain tolerance, rapid adaptation, and irrational will to live. Known to weaponize local fauna, terrain, and even weather. Do not engage. Repeat. Do not engage. The file was over 300 cycles old. Marked obsolete. Buried after the Great Silence. Protocol law passed when the Vulnari decided to ignore mythical threats to focus on orderly expansion. Vex stared at the words until they burned into his mind. They didn't call for help, he whispered. They called for judgment. His second-in-command entered, face pale. Strategos? The humans are broadcasting again. Put it through. Admiral Rook's face filled the screen. She looked tired, but her eyes were hard as steel. You bombed unarmed people who never fired a shot, she said, voice low and steady. You marked them as resistance because they breathed your air. On Earth, we have a word for that. She paused. Cowardice. Vex wanted to argue, to explain that it was procedure, that it was logic, but the words died in his throat, because he finally saw it not as a Vulnari, but as a living being. Those humans hadn't attacked. They'd hidden. They'd survived. And when they finally cried out, they didn't beg. They warned, and the whole human race had answered. Another officer rushed in. Strategos. The surface teams? They're surrendering. The humans accepted their weapons. But they're not taking prisoners. They're helping them. What? It's true. Human medics are treating our wounded, giving them water. One Marine even shared his rations with a captured scout. Vex frowned. Why? Because that was the final crushing truth. Humans didn't fight out of hate. They fought out of care. They protected their own with teeth and fire. But once the threat was gone, they showed mercy. Not because they were weak, but because they were strong enough to choose kindness. On Earth, survival wasn't just about strength. It was about community, about pulling each other through the dark. The Vulnari had never understood that. They saw war as a game of control. Humans saw it as a last resort to defend what mattered. Vex opened a channel to his remaining ships. All units, stand down. Full surrender protocol. No resistance. His officers stared at him in shock. Surrender was not in the Velnari doctrine, ever. But Vex had seen the truth. Fighting these creatures was like punching a storm. You only hurt yourself. He turned back to the screen. Admiral Rook was still watching. We surrender, he said, voice hollow. Please, spare our lives. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, you attacked civilians. That's not forgotten. But you stopped when you saw the cost. That counts for something. She cut the feed. On the planet below, human Marines disarmed the last Velnari squads without violence. They checked IDs, separated combatants from support staff, and set up field hospitals for both sides. One young Velnari soldier, barely out of training, sat on a rock, shaking. A human medic knelt beside him. First battle? The medic asked. The Velnari nodded, eyes wide. Yeah, the human said gently. Mine was worse. Trust me. He handed him a canteen. Drink. You're safe now. Above, the human fleet held position, but their guns were silent. The storm had passed. Back on Velnari Prime, the Central Synod received the battle logs. At first, they refused to believe it. Then they replayed the footage. Human ships dropping rods from orbit, Marines riding dust scorpions, medics treating enemies. The Grand Speaker stood, his voice trembling. We were wrong. All this time, we were wrong. The old laws were pulled from the archives. The Great Silence Protocol was repealed by emergency vote. A new order was issued across the hegemony. All commanders are to treat any system within 200 light-years of Sol as a Level 1 quarantine zone. No entry without triple diplomatic clearance. No military action without direct approval from the High Synod. And under no circumstances are you to harm, threaten, or even approach a human without first sending a formal request and waiting for a reply. They even added a note at the bottom, written in every major language. If you hear the word Deathworlders, run. Do not look back. In his ruined command ship, Zern Vex watched the humans load their wounded onto transports. He saw them lift off, not in triumph, but in quiet duty. He finally understood. The humans weren't monsters. They weren't gods. They were survivors forged in a world that tried to kill them every day and lost. And now, the galaxy would learn to respect them, not out of fear alone, but out of awe, because only a species that had stared into the abyss and said, "Is that all you've got?" could answer an SOS with an entire fleet, and still offer water to their enemies. Vex closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, he felt small. And for the first time, he was glad to be alive. Once the wounded were safe, the Velnari prisoners secured, and the last fire put out, they began to pack up. There was no victory parade, no grand speeches, just quiet work-loading gear, checking systems, helping each other. The survivors, Elias, Mira, and Jack, stood near the edge of the landing zone, watching the fleet prepare to leave. Their old ship, the Rusty Nail, was beyond repair. But a new one waited for them, a small, fast scout named Second Wind, gifted by the crew of the Iron Mule. Guess this is goodbye, Elias said, shaking hands with the Marine who'd pulled him from the cave. The Marine grinned. Nah, you're family now. You call, we come. That's how it works. Mira looked at the sky. Human ships hung in orbit like silent guardians. Do you think they'll ever come back here? Only if someone gets stupid again, Jack said, leaning on a crutch but standing tall. Below them, the Velnari occupation camp was gone. Not just destroyed, erased. Bulldozers from the human engineering corps had leveled every tent, every drone pad, every prefab wall. The land was being returned to how it was, raw, wild, and free. In the center of the cleared zone, workers lowered a tall steel pillar into the ground. It was black, forged from salvaged hull plating and etched with words in over 100 languages. But the message was the same in all of them. Ask before you take. Or next time, we bring the whole neighborhood. Admiral Rook stood beside it for a moment, hand resting on the cool metal. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The message spoke for itself. Then she turned and walked back to her ship. The Bellerophon hummed softly, ready to jump. Her crew waited on the ramp. All ships report ready, Admiral, her first officer said. She nodded. Then let's go home. But home, for humans, was not one place. It was everywhere their people lived, on frozen moons, in asteroid cities, on colony worlds bathed in alien suns. And where humans lived, the fleet watched as the human ships lifted off, one by one. The sky of Kes9 cleared. The dust settled. The wind howled through empty canyons, as it had for millions of years. The planet was quiet again, but the galaxy had changed. On Volnari Prime, the High Synod passed a new law. It was simple, written in bold letters on every military briefing screen. Do not provoke the Deathworlders. Ever. Schools began teaching the truth, that Earth was real, that humans were not myth, and that their kindness came only after their fury was spent. Merchants rerouted trade lanes to avoid human space, not out of fear, but respect. Explorers added a new rule to their logs. If you find humans, offer tea first. Weapons later if ever, and in dark corners of the galaxy, where pirates and slavers once thrived, a new rumor spread. Don't touch human ships, even the wounded ones. Because if you do, they all come. Back aboard the Bellerophon, Admiral Rook sat in her quarters. The lights were dim. A real cup of coffee steamed on her desk grown from beans brought from Earth itself. She stared out the viewport at the stars. Then her comms panel beeped. A new message. Encrypted. Priority. Alpha. She opened it. Another SOS. Faint. Desperate. Sent from deep in the corward expanse. The signal was weak, but the code was clear. Alert Omega 9 Deathworlders. In peril coordinates. VYX42. She didn't hesitate. She stood, walked to the bridge, and said 2 words. Sound the horn. Alarms blared. Lights flashed red. Crew members dropped what they were doing and ran to their stations. Fighters powered up. Engines roared to life, because this was not just a job. It was a promise made long ago, on a blue-green world where life fought for every breath. We protect our own, and if anyone forgot that, well, Kes9 had just taught the galaxy the price of forgetting. The Bellerophon turned toward the new coordinates. Around it, other human ships fell into formation. Old ships, new ships, broken ships held together by hope and welds. They did not ask why they were going. They did not ask if it was safe. They just went. Because out here, in the endless dark, humanity was more than a species. They were the storm that answered cries in the night. The hand that pulled you up when you fell. The voice that said, "You're not alone." And if you hurt one of them, you didn't just wake a fleet. You woke the whole damn neighborhood. As the human ships jumped into warp. Stars stretched into lines, and silence returned to Kes9. But the steel pillar remained. And somewhere, far away, another human was in trouble. And the Deathworlders were already on their way.